Look, I need identification, proof of legal status now.
I'm a licensed attorney. Victoria Benjamin, Texas State Bar.
Everyone claims something, lady. Show documentation proving citizenship, right now.
Listen, my license is here. 15 years practicing law.
Stop stalling. Produce the papers or you're being detained.
Do not touch me.
Call your supervisor.
The Green Valley Grocery on Oak Street was bustling when it happened. Saturday morning, 10:45 a.m. The kind of Colorado spring that teased warmth with crisp air and sunlight glinting off shopping carts like scattered diamonds. Sarah Jenkins had pulled into the lot for a quick grocery run before heading to her mother's house. Still in weekend clothes, light jacket yoga pants, her kid's backpack slung over her shoulder. Her 8-year-old son Leo was asking about lunch. Her 6-year-old daughter Mia was already sneaking an apple from the bag, just another Saturday errand. Except 3 ICE agents were stepping out of an unmarked SUV she hadn't noticed parked across the lot. Their body cameras were already rolling, recording what would become the most expensive grocery trip in Colorado history. If you're ready to see institutional racism taken down like this video, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this story. Agent Richard Vance led the approach. His partners, Agents Henderson and Miller, spread wide in a tactical formation like they were coring something dangerous. Sarah saw them coming as she opened the trunk. Read the spacing, the hands hovering near their belts, the body language of men who'd already made their decision. 15 years of practicing law, of reading courtrooms and depositions, and hostile witnesses had taught her to catalog threats in seconds. Federal agents' immigration and customs enforcement patches visible on their tactical vests, moving toward her rental car like she was already guilty of something. She knew where this was headed before Vance reached her bumper. Leo stood by the cart mid-sentence about what Grandma might cook for dinner. He stopped talking when he noticed the men approaching, his excitement fading into confusion. Mia hugged the apple bag tighter, her small frame pressing against Sarah's leg. Sarah kept loading groceries. Slow movements, visible hands. 15 years of facing down prosecutors and hostile judges had also taught her that sudden reactions around armed officers ended badly. Vance's voice cut through the parking lot. Noise flat, bureaucratic rehearsed. Afternoon. Immigration and Customs Enforcement conducting a compliance check in this area. Need to see identification and proof of legal status. The words carried no inflection. Procedure without thought. Authority without question. Sarah straightened, keeping her hands where they could see them. The bag of bread still in her grip. I'm a licensed attorney. New York State Bar, Sarah Jenkins. My identification and bar card are in my wallet in the vehicle. She gestured slowly toward the open car door, making sure every movement was deliberate and clear. Vance didn't move. Didn't let her move. Everyone says there's something. Got any documentation on you right now proving citizenship? The way he said it left no room for doubt. He didn't believe her. Sarah felt the familiar heat igniting her chest. The quiet fury that came from being treated like this in a grocery store parking lot with her children watching wearing weekend clothes on a Saturday morning visiting family. My driver's license is in my wallet. My New York State bar card is with it. I've been a practicing attorney for 15 years. If you call the State Bar of New York, they'll verify everything. We'll verify once we've established identity and status. Vance's voice had gone colder, now sharper. Mia's small hand found Sarah's. Mama! It's okay, baby. Sarah kept her eyes on Vance, her voice low and steady. Stay close to me. But it wasn't okay. Henderson moved to the passenger side of the rental car, peering through the windows like he was searching for contraband. Miller positioned himself near the cart, cutting off any exit toward the store. The SUV blocked her from behind. She was boxed in. Sarah reached slowly for her purse on the passenger seat. Vance's hand moved to his belt. Stop. Don't reach for anything. Step away from the vehicle. I'm retrieving my identification. Sarah kept her voice level, her training kicking in. Document everything. Speak clearly. Assume everything is being recorded. You asked for documentation. It's in my wallet. Step away from the vehicle now. The command hung in the air, heavy and absolute around them. The parking lot continued its Saturday rhythm. Families loading SUVs, teenagers laughing near the entrance, the smell of fresh bread and produce drifting through open doors. But a few people were starting to notice. A woman pushing a cart 2 rows over pulled out her phone. An elderly man near the store entrance stopped to watch. Sarah stepped back from the car, hands raised where Vance could see them. I'm complying. I'm Sarah Jenkins, member of the New York State Bar License number 73492. I'm unarmed. My children are with me. There's no reasonable suspicion for this stop. She said it loud enough for the body cameras for the phones now recording from nearby shoppers for anyone paying attention. Vance grabbed her wrist the moment she cleared the car door, twisting her arm behind her back. Henderson moved in from the other side. The handcuffs were cold against her skin, the metal biting into her wrists as they clicked shut. "Mama!" Leo's voice cracked high and terrified. Mia started crying, the apple bag dropping to the pavement. "It's okay, baby. Stay right there. Don't move." Sarah kept her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "This is an unlawful seizure. I'm not resisting. I'm a New York State attorney. This is being recorded. You're violating my Fourth Amendment rights. There is no reasonable suspicion. I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in Brooklyn, New York." Vance wasn't listening. He was already walking her toward the SUV. Henderson holding her other arm. Miller stayed by the children, his presence keeping them from following. The bystanders were fully engaged now. Phones out recording. A store employee rushed over toward Leo and Mia. Someone shouted something Sarah couldn't make out over the roar of blood in her ears. A cart clattered across the lot, abandoned. Sarah cataloged it all. The time, 10:53 a.m. The lack of Miranda warnings. The absence of any articulated reasonable suspicion. The dismissal of her credentials without verification. Vance's badge number visible on his vest. 4,791. Henderson's 5,238. The body camera's red lights blinking. The growing crowd. Her children's tears. Her mind, trained by years of building cases from fragments and inconsistencies, was already constructing the framework. Fourth Amendment violation, unlawful seizure without probable cause, racial profiling, infliction of emotional distress, denial of due process each moment, another brick in a case she would build from memory and rage and meticulous legal precision. The SUV door opened. Vance guided her head down as they loaded her into the back seat. Through the window, Sarah could see the store employee kneeling beside Leo and Mia, trying to comfort them. Could see her son's face tear-streaked and confused. Could see her daughter reaching toward the SUV, calling for her. The door slammed shut. The vehicle pulled out of the lot, leaving her children with a stranger leaving her groceries scattered across the pavement, leaving her rental car parked with the trunk still open and the doors unlocked. Inside the SUV, Vance and Henderson spoke in low tones from the front seats, casual, bureaucratic. The radio crackled with dispatch codes. The GPS display showed the route to the processing facility 30 minutes northeast. Sarah sat in silence, wrists aching from the cuffs, and listened. "That's 3 this week from this zone," Henderson said, his voice carrying to the back seat. "Should put us over quota for the month." Vance grunted acknowledgement. "They're really pushing the minority neighborhoods. Easy numbers." The words landed like stones in Sarah's gut. She kept her face neutral, her breathing steady, but her mind sharpened to a razor's edge. Quote, "A system targeting minority neighborhoods. Performance metrics." They were saying it out loud. Casual as discussing lunch orders, oblivious to the attorney, sitting 3 feet behind them, cataloging every word. This wasn't just her case anymore. This was systemic, institutional, a pattern of corruption, hiding behind badges and bureaucratic language. Sarah closed her eyes and committed it to memory. Every word, every inflection, the exact phrasing. This would be the keystone, the piece that would crack the entire operation open. The facility appeared after 28 minutes. A low concrete building surrounded by chain link and razor wire. Institutional gray under a sky that had clouded over. The spring warmth gone, replaced by the smell of diesel and pavement. They processed her in a sterile room that reeked of disinfectant and sweat. Still handcuffed, still denied verification of her identity. A different agent name tag reading Brooks took her fingerprints with bureaucratic indifference, barely looking at her face. Sarah answered their questions with measured precision. Name, date of birth, address, she requested her attorney, requested a phone call, requested verification of her bar membership. Each request met with the same flat response. In process, all in due time, standard procedure. She asked pointed questions in return, legal challenges wrapped in calm tones. Under what authority am I being detained? What reasonable suspicion justified this seizure? Why wasn't my identification verified on scene? Do you have a warrant? Have I been charged with anything? The agents shifted uncomfortable, exchanged glances. Brooks left the room twice, returning both times with the same non-committal responses. They were stalling, checking her story. realizing perhaps that they'd grabbed someone with actual credentials instead of the easy target they profiled her as. Sarah held back the quota information. They moved her to a holding cell 8 by 10 feet, fluorescent lights humming overhead, metal bench bolted to the wall. The handcuffs finally came off, leaving red marks on her wrists. The door locked with a heavy click. Through the small window, Sarah could see agents moving in the hallway, paperwork being shuffled. The clock on the wall visible through the door's reinforced glass. 12:17 p.m. An hour and 27 minutes since Vance had grabbed her wrist. Her children were still with strangers. Her mother was probably receiving a frantic call from the store employee by now. Her car was still parked with the trunk open, groceries, likely baking in the returned sunshine, and she was locked in a cell. Her professional credentials dismissed her constitutional rights, violated her family, traumatized all because 3 federal agents saw a black woman in casual clothes and made assumptions that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with the color of her skin. Sarah sat on the metal bench, her back straight, her mind racing through case law and precedents and filing procedures. She thought of her law school graduation top of her class at one of New York's most distinguished programs, the subtle discrimination she'd faced there, sharpening her into something precise and unyielding. She thought of the cases she'd won, the clients she'd defended, the system she'd learned to navigate and occasionally beat. She thought of Leo's terrified voice, Mia's tears, the way her daughter had reached for her through the SUV window. The fluorescent lights hummed. The clock ticked forward. 2:00 p.m., then 2:30. Sarah Jenkins, New York State attorney, unlawfully detained mother witness to corruption, sat in that cell and began to build her case. 3 hours and 42 minutes. That was how long Sarah spent in the holding cell before they finally verified her identity and released her. 3 hours and 42 minutes of fluorescent lights and disinfectant smell and the steady tick of the hallway clock. 3 hours and 42 minutes while her children waited with strangers, while her mother made frantic calls, while bystander videos circulated on local news feeds. Her wrists still bore the red marks from the handcuffs when Brooks finally opened the cell door, his expression carefully neutral. "We've confirmed your identity, Miss Jenkins. You're free to go." No apology, no explanation, just bureaucratic acknowledgement that they'd made a mistake, wrapped in language designed to deflect accountability. Sarah stood smoothing her jacket with deliberate calm. "I want copies of all body camera footage from today's incident. I want the names and badge numbers of every agent involved. I want documentation of the reasonable suspicion that justified my detention." Brooks's jaw tightened. "You can file a formal request through proper channels. I'm filing it now verbally on record." Sarah kept her voice level. "Attorney Grant, I also want the incident report number and the name of your supervising officer." The hesitation in Brooks's eyes told her everything. They knew they'd crossed lines. Multiple lines, constitutional lines, the kind that ended careers and spawned lawsuits. She collected her belongings, wallet, phone keys from the property desk, and walked out into late afternoon sunshine that felt too bright after hours under artificial lights. A taxi waited at the curb arranged by her mother. The reunion at her mother's house shattered Sarah's composed facade. Leo and Mia ran to her the moment she stepped through the door, their small bodies colliding with hers, arms wrapping tight around her waist. "Mama, mama, mama." The word repeated like a prayer, like reassurance that she was real and back and safe. Sarah knelt on the entryway floor and held them, felt their tears soak into her jacket, felt her own tears come hot and fast. "I'm here, babies. I'm right here. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Her mother, Martha. 73 years of New York strength and civil rights memory stood in the doorway, with her own tears falling silent. Later, when the children finally released their grip and went to wash their faces, Martha pulled Sarah into the kitchen. "They put handcuffs on you in front of your babies at a grocery store." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the rage and grief lodged in her throat. "What are you going to do?" "What I was trained to do," Sarah's voice came out steady cold. "I'm going to take them apart." That night, after the children finally fell asleep, Leo in her bed, Mia curled against her side, both refusing to let her out of sight. Sarah sat at her mother's dining table and began to document everything. Timestamps, badge numbers, exact quotes from Vance's initial demand and her responses, the tactical formation, the dismissal of her credentials, the handcuffs applied without cause, Leo's terrified voice, Mia's tears. The bystander videos she'd already located on social media, downloaded backed up in 3 separate locations, and the quota system, the conversation she'd overheard in the SUV Vance and Henderson's casual admission of targeting minority neighborhoods for easy numbers. Performance metrics. Systemic corruption hiding behind federal authority. Her distinguished legal education years of late nights and precedent study and oral arguments against professors who doubted a black woman from Brooklyn belonged in their program had prepared her for this, had sharpened her into exactly the weapon she needed to be. Fourth Amendment violation. Clear as daylight. Unlawful seizure without reasonable suspicion, without probable cause, without even minimal justification. Racial profiling targeting based solely on appearance in direct violation of equal protection guarantees infliction of emotional distress, the trauma to her children, witnesses to their mother's humiliation and terror, and now, with the overheard conversation, a potential pattern and practice claim, evidence of systemic corruption that went far beyond 3 agents in a parking lot. Sarah worked through the night building the skeleton of her case while her children slept fitfully beside her. 2 days later, back in New York, she sat across from Robert Sterling, a civil rights attorney whose reputation for dismantling institutional racism was legendary. His office walls displayed framed verdicts, each one a defeat of the kind of systemic abuse Sarah had experienced. Sterling reviewed her documentation in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. When he reached the quota system notes, he looked up sharply. "You heard this directly in the vehicle." "Word for word." Sarah met his gaze. "Vance said 3 this week from this zone should put us over quota for the month. Henderson replied about pushing minority neighborhoods for easy numbers." Sterling leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Miss Jenkins, they didn't just violate your rights. They handed you the key to expose an entire operation." The lawsuit filed 3 weeks later named the United States government, the Department of Homeland Security, Immigration, and Customs Enforcement, and agents Vance, Henderson, and Miller individually. The charges: unlawful detention violation of Fourth Amendment rights, racial profiling, infliction of emotional distress, denial of due process. The evidence was devastating. 6 bystander videos from different angles showing the entire parking lot incident. The store employee's witness statement describing the children's trauma. Sarah's own credentials. New York State Bar membership. Law school transcripts. 15 years of distinguished practice. Psychological evaluations of Leo and Mia documenting anxiety, sleep disturbances, fear of uniformed authorities, trust fractured at ages 8 and 6, and buried in Sarah's deposition, waiting for the right strategic moment, the quota system revelation. The government's initial response came fast. $75,000 confidentiality agreement attached. Sign here. Go away quietly. Let them bury this beneath bureaucratic paperwork and sealed settlements. Sarah's response was equally fast. No. Sterling delivered her rejection in person in federal court with media present. Miss Jenkins declines the settlement offer. She seeks a public trial to expose the systematic violations that led to her unlawful detention and to prevent future abuses of federal authority. The offer increased $300,000. Still with the confidentiality clause, still demanding silence. Sarah rejected it again. The government could keep their money. She wanted accountability, transparency, a public record that would prevent them from doing this to someone else's children. Discovery intensified deposition, scheduled document request filed, and then Sarah revealed the quota conversation in her sworn testimony, backed by the meticulous mental notes she'd recorded immediately after release. The defense team's reaction was visible even through formal legal language, emergency motions filed attempts to suppress arguments about hearsay and lack of corroboration. But Sarah's credibility distinguished attorney no criminal record. Consistent testimony corroborated timeline held firm. The case expanded. Sterling filed additional discovery requests targeting ICE's internal performance metrics for that region. Email records, supervision reports, detention statistics broken down by neighborhood demographics. Patterns emerged. Minority neighborhoods targeted at rates 3 times higher than predominantly white areas, despite identical legal status distributions. Detention quotas tied to agent performance reviews. Bonuses linked to numbers rather than legitimate enforcement. Sarah spent her evenings preparing testimony while balancing motherhood. Leo still woke with nightmares. Mia asked repeatedly if the men would come back. Sarah enrolled them in therapy, sat through sessions where they drew pictures of that day stick figures with handcuffs, crying faces, SUVs looming large. Do you believe federal agents need stricter guidelines to prevent baseless immigration checks? Drop yes or no in the comments below and share why such accountability could shield families from heartbreaking orals like this. Perhaps even share this story to spread awareness. She also began mentoring. A young law student, Chloe Davis, first-generation college graduate, from a marginalized Brooklyn neighborhood, reached out after reading about the case. Sarah took her on, taught her how to build arguments from evidence fragments, how to stay composed under cross-examination, how to channel rage into precision. Supporters rallied. Community activists organized courthouse vigils for the trial date. Fellow attorneys offered pro bono research assistance. Local news coverage grew into national attention. The case that had started in a grocery store parking lot was becoming a referendum on federal authority and racial profiling. The government made one final settlement offer $1.2 million, no confidentiality requirement. Sarah considered it for exactly 3 minutes before declining. This isn't about money. This is about making sure they can't do this again. Trial preparation consumed her final weeks. Mock cross-examinations exhibit organization-witness coordination. Sterling prepared her for the defense's inevitable attacks that would question her memory of the quota conversation challenge, her emotional state argue about legal technicalities, and qualified immunity. Sarah prepared differently. She reviewed her children's therapy notes, watched the bystander videos until she could recite every word she'd spoken in that parking lot, studied the Fourth Amendment case law until she could cite precedents in her sleep. She drew on New York roots generations of civil rights perseverance, the memory of her grandmother, who'd marched in Brooklyn in the 60s, the legacy of resistance against institutional prejudice. This case was bigger than her humiliation. It was about Leo and Mia learning that injustice had consequences, that power, when abused, could be challenged, that their mother's credentials and dignity mattered. The night before trial, Sarah stood in her Denver hotel room looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Vance and Henderson and Miller were preparing their own testimony. Somewhere, federal attorneys were rehearsing arguments about qualified immunity and good faith mistakes. Tomorrow, she would walk into that courthouse not as the woman they dismissed in a parking lot, but as the attorney they catastrophically underestimated. Sarah turned from the window, opened her trial binder one final time, and reviewed her opening statement notes. She was ready. The Denver County Courthouse stood against an autumn morning sky, its stone facade gray under clouds that threatened early snow. October in Denver, 6 months since the parking lot, since the handcuffs. Since her children's screams, 6 months of depositions and discovery, and sleepless preparation. Sarah entered through security and professional attire, tailored navy suit, minimal jewelry, her New York State bar pin visible on her lapel. Behind her, Martha held Leo and Mia's hands. The children dressed carefully for a day they wouldn't fully understand until years later. Reporters lined the corridor cameras tracking her movement, but Sarah kept her eyes forward. The courtroom was packed. Activists in the gallery wearing shirts that read, quote, and end racial profiling. Fellow attorneys from civil rights organizations, media filling the press section, and at the defense table, Vance Henderson Miller in suits, instead of tactical vests flanked by federal attorneys, whose expressions carried the weight of a case they'd underestimated. Judge Elena Rostova, a black woman whose reputation for precision was legendary, took the bench at 9 a.m. The jury, 8 women, 4 men, diverse in age and background, filed in with faces carefully neutral. Sterling's opening statement was surgical. He presented synchronized footage from 6 angles body cameras, bystander phones, security cameras from the Green Valley grocery. The jury watched Sarah load groceries in real time, watched the agents converge, watched her present identification that was dismissed without verification, watched her children's terror as handcuffs clicked shut, watched her voice remain steady while asserting her rights, citing constitutional protections, identifying herself over and over while being dragged away. The defense argued good faith, routine compliance check, no racial motivation, unfortunate misunderstanding quickly corrected upon proper verification. Agent Vance testified first, his narrative polished by federal coaching. They'd received intelligence about undocumented individuals in that area, had approached Sarah based on behavioral indicators, had followed standard protocol. Sterling destroyed him on cross-examination. What specific behavioral indicators? Vance hesitated. General demeanor. Miss Jenkins was loading groceries with her children. Is that suspicious behavior? The jury leaned forward. In the context of our intelligence, Vance started, what intelligence produce it? Sterling's demand echoed through the courtroom. The defense couldn't. No specific intelligence, no actionable tip, nothing beyond Vance's assertion that Sarah had looked out of place. Looked out of place? How? Sterling pressed. Vance's silence was damning. Sarah's testimony came on day 3. She detailed her career, 15 years of distinguished practice law school honors, complex cases won through meticulous preparation. described that Saturday morning, the casual family errand, the sudden confrontation. Her children's fear, the handcuffs biting her wrists while she recited her credentials, her rights, her citizenship, all dismissed because 3 agents looked at her skin and made assumptions. Then she revealed, to quote a conversation word for word, exactly as she documented Vance's voice saying 3 this week from this zone. Henderson's casual agreement about pushing minority neighborhoods for easy numbers. The courtroom went silent. Sterling entered her mental notes into evidence pages written the night of her release, time-stamped, witnessed by her mother. The defense objected frantically hearsay, uncorroborated, but Sarah's credibility held. Her profession, her training, her documented timeline, her lack of any motive to fabricate. The defense crumbled further when Sterling introduced discovery documents they'd fought to suppress. Internal, ICE emails discussing performance metrics tied to detention numbers. Supervision reports praising agents for aggressive enforcement in target zones, zones that were 85% minority neighborhoods. Statistical analysis showing detention rates 3 times higher in Black and Latino areas, despite identical legal status demographics. The quota system wasn't speculation, it was policy hiding behind euphemism. Expert witnesses followed. Dr. Alan Carter, child psychologist, testified about Leo and Mia's trauma sleep disturbances, anxiety around unformed authorities, trust broken at developmental stages where security is foundational. He showed the jury drawings the children had made stick figures with handcuffs, crying faces, SUVs that dominated the page like monsters. Constitutional law expert Professor Samuel Higgins detailed Fourth Amendment violations. No reasonable suspicion, no probable cause. Detention extended hours beyond any justification. Credentials dismissed without minimal verification effort. Each element a textbook example of unlawful seizure. The defense's qualified immunity argument that agents couldn't have known their actions were unlawful collapsed under the weight of Sarah's clearly stated objections. Her repeated identification, her citation of specific constitutional protections while being detained. They'd been told explicitly that they were violating her rights. They proceeded anyway. Closing argument spanned an afternoon. The defense urged mercy, understanding the difficulty of federal enforcement in complex situations. Sterling countered with simplicity. Sarah Jenkins presented identification. Her credentials were verified. She was detained anyway. Her children watched their mother handcuffed and removed because 3 agents saw a black woman and couldn't imagine she might be exactly who she said she was. The jury deliberated 5 days. Sarah spent them in controlled waiting mornings with her children reading to them, answering their questions about the trial with age-appropriate honesty. Afternoons reviewing notes with Sterling preparing for possible outcomes. Evenings with Martha drawing strength from New York roots and civil rights legacy. On the 5th day, the jury sent word verdict reached. The courtroom filled again, activists, media supporters who'd followed every moment. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, breathing steady. Leo and Mia remained with Martha in a separate room shielded from whatever came next. Judge Rostova read the verdict form. On the charge of unlawful detention, guilty. On the charge of Fourth Amendment violations, guilty. On the charge of racial profiling, guilty. On the charge of infliction of emotional distress, guilty. Unanimous on all counts. The damages phase took another day. Compensatory damages for Sarah's trauma, for her children's psychological harm. For violations of constitutional rights, punitive damages against the individual agents and the government agency that had fostered a quota system prioritizing numbers over legality. The final award, $15.4 million. The courtroom erupted. Applause from the gallery despite Rostova's gavel. Activists shouting victory. Media rushing for statements. At the defense table, Vance stared at the floor. Henderson's face had gone gray. Miller sat motionless. Sarah remained still, her expression composed, but her eyes reflected something deeper. Vindication measured not in money, but in accountability in a public record that couldn't be sealed or buried in precedent that would protect others. Outside the courthouse, she made a brief statement to assembled press. This was never about compensation. It was about ensuring that what happened to my children and me doesn't happen to another family. It was about exposing corruption that treats human beings as quotas and credentials as irrelevant because of skin color. I hope this verdict sends a message that such behavior has consequences. The consequences rippled outward. Vance, Henderson, and Miller were suspended pending internal investigation. The ICE regional office announced policy reviews and mandatory bias training. Federal oversight committees launched inquiries into quota systems across multiple jurisdictions. The The case became cited precedent in civil rights litigation nationwide. Sarah returned to New York with her children and her mother, the verdict behind them, but the work ahead. She used part of the award to open Jenkins & Associates, a law firm specializing in civil rights violations, racial profiling, unlawful detention cases. Pro bono work prioritized victims who couldn't afford representation, given the same meticulous preparation she'd received. She hired staff carefully young attorneys from marginalized backgrounds who understood systemic abuse from personal experience, paralegals who'd faced discrimination, investigators who knew which neighborhoods were targeted and why. The firm became a beacon. Families traveled from across New York and beyond, bringing stories of traffic stops that escalated without cause, detentions based on appearance credentials, dismissed rights violated. Sarah took each case personally, building arguments from evidence fragments, teaching her staff to channel rage into precision. She also mentored. Chloe Davis joined the firm after passing the bar. Her first case supervised directly by Sarah. Other law students followed first-generation graduates, immigrants, survivors of the same systems they now fought against. Sarah taught them what her own experience had proven. Underestimated power is the most dangerous kind. Overlooked brilliance is the sharpest weapon. Leo and Mia grew up watching their mother's purpose. Therapy continued, the nightmares fading, gradually replaced by understanding. By age 10 and 8, they could articulate what had happened to them. Unlawful detention, racial profiling, systemic injustice could explain why their mother worked late preparing cases. Could see justice not as something granted, but as something claimed through evidence and persistence. The firm funded youth program scholarships for students from targeted neighborhoods, community workshops on constitutional rights. Know Your Rights materials distributed in multiple languages. The trauma Sarah had endured became the foundation for preventing others' trauma. Years accumulated. The firm won case after case, each verdict another brick in accountability's wall. Sarah spoke at law schools her story, a case study in turning violation into vindication. She returned to her alma mater in New York, the Distinguished Program, where she'd face subtle discrimination, and lectured to new students about resilient strategy, the long game of dismantling bias. The Green Valley grocery parking lot. Meanwhile, installed a small bronze plaque near the entrance. Witness injustice, document truth, demand accountability. Below it, a QR code linking to resources on civil rights and legal aid. Shoppers passed it daily, most without noticing, but some stopped to read, to remember, to understand that ordinary moments could become extraordinary reckonings. Sarah drove past similar scenes, often grocery stores, parking lots, everyday spaces where families move through routine errands. She thought about that Saturday morning 6 years ago, 7 years ago, eventually a decade ago, thought about the woman she'd been, then distinguished attorney, already, but underestimated, dismissed, humiliated, and the woman she'd become, still distinguished, but no longer overlooked. A force that had dismantled institutional corruption, established precedent, built a legacy of accountability that rippled outward with every case, every verdict, every family she helped. She thought about Leo and Mia, teenagers, now watching her work with pride instead of fear. Learning that power abuse could be challenged, that credentials mattered, that their mother's dignity, once violated, had been reclaimed through method and evidence and unyielding persistence. Sarah pulled into her own driveway one evening, groceries in the trunk, ordinary Saturday errands, complete without incident. Inside, her children helped unload bags while discussing their week. Martha visited for dinner, her New York strength and civil rights memory, a foundation that had held through everything. Later, Sarah returned to her home office, reviewed case files for Monday's hearing, mentored a young attorney via video call. The work continued. It would always continue because systems didn't dismantle themselves, because bias didn't fade without confrontation, because the line between acceptable and unacceptable had to be drawn, reinforced, defended. Sarah Jenkins had drawn that line in a Denver parking lot with her children watching, had reinforced it through $15.4 million in damages, had defended it through a firm that turned victims into advocates, and trauma into transformation. The grocery store confrontation had cost 3 agents their careers and the government millions. But the real cost, the permanent cost, was the message sent to every federal agency, every officer, every system that assumed credentials didn't matter when skin color did. They'd underestimated the wrong woman. They traumatized her children. They'd handed her evidence of their own corruption, and she'd made sure the entire country knew the consequences. The fluorescent lights of her office hummed softly. Outside, New York nights settled over quiet streets. Sarah closed her case file, turned off her desk lamp, and went to join her family. Tomorrow, another case, another family seeking justice. Another opportunity to ensure that what happened to her became harder, rarer, costlier for those who would repeat it. The work was never finished, but the line held firm, and that was enough. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.